It's account review time! Hey everyone, Shark here, and we got some overwhelmingly positive responses for account reviews. There are literally hundreds of submissions and it will take me a really long time to get through them all, so please be patient. In the meantime, make sure to watch these videos because even if it takes a while for me to get to your specific account, the information here is still valuable to understanding how to build characters and how to put a team together. And obviously, since there are a ton of accounts to review, you can check the other account review videos that I'll have in a special playlist for an even better understanding of how to build characters, teams, and progress your account. With all that being said, it is a lot of work to review literally hundreds of accounts, so if you could like the video, it would really mean a lot to me. It takes hours and hours of work for me, but all I need is a quick tap of that thumbs up button from you. And now that you've liked the video, let's jump into the account reviews. Alright, let's see who the next person is. They want team building help, general help, want to know which characters they should prioritize, they really like using Beto, don't want to use Amber, Lisa, or Diona, that shouldn't be a problem here. And here's their UID, Asia server, and let's go over and check them out. Red, hold on. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, they're missing a number. Well, I guess I can't do anything here because it's a 9-digit number for UID, not an 8, so they must have missed something when they filled this out. So, sorry friend, we're gonna have to move on to the next person. Alright, next person wants team building help, general advice, and mostly artifact and weapon help too. Okay, we can help with that. Characters they like Alhaitham and Raiden, their main uses. Barbara and Kuki Shinobu just started getting level 90. Okay, nice. Not really a fan of bow users except Venti. Cool, yeah, we can do something with that. By the way, when most people say they don't like using bow users, I think what they're referring to is they don't like using the charge shots or the aim shots with bows, which I totally understand. It doesn't feel good in Genshin. Or they don't like bow characters' auto attacks, which I also get because they don't feel really good because the bow shots tend to arc and they can miss enemies pretty easily, but most bow characters don't actually do that. Outside of characters like Ganyu and Yoimiya, most bow characters will use their skill, which usually isn't some sort of aiming mode unless it's Faruzan or unless it's a low constellation Sara. And then after using their skill, you'll probably use their elemental burst and then switch off to a different character. So while it doesn't feel great to use bow characters in Genshin, especially if you have to do the aim shots, luckily a lot of characters don't actually require you to do that. So let's check out our friend's account and see what they've got going on. Alhaitham, Raiden, Venti, Xingqiu, Xiangling, Bennett, Kuki, Barbara, AR-55, Clawfie. Oh, I know Clawfie. Very nice, very cool. Alright, let's take a look. Aha, I see several things already. Alright, let's continue forward. I just want to see a few things here. Okay. Okay. Alright. Okay. And okay. Alright, very good. We're going to focus most of this review on Alhaitham because you have him level 90, and there are some things we need to address about this guy. And it's mostly his weapon and artifacts. Alhaitham is a character that really loves EM, and he wants EM but also attack and crit. But you've built Alhaitham as if he was a physical damage dealer, and he's best used as a dendro damage dealer. So the first and easiest upgrade for you is to swap prototype Rancor off of him and give him either the Tokabu Shigure, which is the event sword that has 165 EM at level 90, also better known as the Umbrella Sword. But if you weren't around or didn't play for that event, then give him the Iron Sting. It's a craftable 4-star weapon with EM as the substat. It's usually the one people recommend for Kazuha, even though Favonia's sword is actually better for Kazuha. But that's a whole different topic for a different green boy, so let's focus on Alhaitham. Once you've given him the Tokabu Shigure Umbrella Sword or the Iron Sting, you definitely want to get that to level 90. And that's going to be a big improvement in his damage. Now you may not have all the materials to get that to level 90 right away, so if you can't get that to level 90, just get it to the highest level you can, and then focus on getting his skill to level 8. His skill is where like over 60% of his damage comes from, so you really want this to be very high. This is also the reason why we're building a lot more elemental mastery on Alhaitham, because it's really good for dendro reactions and dendro damage and spread or aggravate or something like that. But Alhaitham also has a passive that increases the damage of his skill by a percentage of his elemental mastery. And because his elemental skill is the biggest source of his damage, having more elemental mastery will just make the biggest source of his damage even more powerful. So that's your first priority. EM weapon either to Kabushigure or the Iron Sting, both free-to-play friendly options, and leveling his skill up to the highest that you can. Maybe you don't have the boss materials yet, but you'll definitely get them. I know since Scaramouche is still a relatively new boss, not everyone has enough materials to get their talents up. But when you do get those mirrors from Scaramouche, make sure to put them into Alhaitham's skill, and then after his skill, you can level up his normal attacks and burst, but get this skill to at least 8 before you do that. Next, we're going to talk about artifacts. You're running gladiators on him, and this is actually pretty bad for Alhaitham. But I don't think that's your fault, I think this is Genshin's fault. And let me explain why. If you use Alhaitham's burst or his skill and you have no mirrors, you get a couple mirrors generated and then you start normal attacking. You see the pretty green lights and the big AoEs and think that, oh, this must be normal attack damage because I'm doing it in my normal attacks, they're just infused with Dendro, so I would want to set like gladiators to make those normal attacks stronger. But that's not how his kit works. The damage that he's doing is actually considered his elemental skill damage, and the normal attack damage is just in between the mirror damage that's actually happening, which is where all of his damage is coming from. But since you're doing normal attack damage, most people won't make the differentiation between normal attack and skill damage, and Genshin sure doesn't give you a very good delineation. So it's quite understandable that most people would expect Alhaitham's skill to be similar to Hu Tao's, where it infuses his normal attacks with Dendro, allows him to do these pretty combos with spinning blades and light swords everywhere. But unlike Hu Tao, you don't really want to focus on Alhaitham's normal attacks because that's not where his damage is coming from, it's actually from the skill itself. And this is why Genshin can be confusing because characters that seem to work in very similar ways can often be very different. This is why something like Gladiators or Shiminawa is not good for Alhaitham, but Hu Tao can use something like Shiminawa's to a pretty good effect. Instead, what you want to do for Alhaitham is give him either a 2-piece EM set like 2-piece Wanderers, 2-piece Gilded Dreams, 2-piece Flower of Paradise Lost, or a 4-piece Gilded Dreams set. 4-piece Gilded Dreams is the best set for him, but if you can only do 2-piece EM, 2-piece EM, that's still really good. However, you need someone with a 4-piece Deepwood Memory set on your team, and if no one has it, then Alhaitham needs to be the one who runs it. But you can use the Dendro Traveler, Kuki Shinobu, or even Raiden to hold the Deepwood Memory set for you because the effect works off-field. So let's talk about artifact substats now. You're going to want a helmet with crit rate or crit damage, you're going to want a Dendro damage goblet, and an Elemental Mastery Sands. Again, prioritize 4-piece Deepwood on Alhaitham if you have no one else to run it in your team. Otherwise, 2-piece EM, 2-piece EM, or 4-piece Gilded is the way to go. For substats, you want to look for energy recharge, crit rate, crit damage, elemental mastery, and attack percent. He wants about 135% elemental mastery, and then as much crit rate, crit damage, and elemental mastery as you can give him. Attack percent is nice, but it's not super important. My Alhaitham only has 1200 attack, but because he has about 600 elemental mastery, he ends up hitting pretty hard. Because once again, Alhaitham's passive increases the damage of his skill, which is the greatest source of his damage in his entire kit, by a percentage of his elemental mastery, so the more elemental mastery you have, the stronger he's going to be. Just don't completely ignore stats like crit damage, energy recharge, and attack, because those are also very important for him. Alright, let's move on to Raiden now. You've got a C1 Raiden with 673 elemental mastery, very nice. And she's also got a 4-piece Emblem of the Severed Fate set. Interesting, very interesting. Your Raiden looks pretty good, and there's a couple of tweaks we can make here, and I'm going to suggest a few things that are going to have you rebuild her slightly. The first thing is, I think you should commit entirely to EM if you're going to build an EM Raiden. You want to level up her skill. You don't need her burst or normal attacks because all of the damage you're doing is going to be from your skill. And because you can do that skill off-field, it means you're not going to be needing things like energy recharge or other typical things that you build on Raiden. You can use another artifact set for her. Or even do something like 2-piece EM, 2-piece EM, which I think is going to be best for you. You've got 2 very solid EM pieces in your Goblet and your Sands, But you can replace your flower and feather with some better pieces, and this is a really good crit damage helmet, so I think this should go somewhere else. Particular, let me check Xiangling. Oh yeah, this would be really nice on Xiangling because it gives you crit damage, crit rate, attack percent, energy recharge, and elemental mastery. These are like some of the god rolled stats. Unfortunately for this Raiden, she doesn't really need all of these. The only thing she really wants is the EM and the crits, but the attack percent and the energy recharge, those would be really helpful on Xiangling. Instead, what I would suggest you do is do something like an Elemental Mastery headpiece from either Wanderer's Troupe or Flower of Paradise Lost or Gilded Dreams, and then another 2-piece artifact set from either Wanderer's Troupe, Flower of Paradise Lost, or Gilded Dreams. So what you want to look for is a 2-piece EM set with EM main stats on the Goblet, headpiece, and the Sands. And you also want to look for crit rate and crit damage, but you don't need any energy recharge. And that might seem absolutely ridiculous for Raiden, but if you can push Raiden to over 1000 EM, which I think you can, the aggravates from her skill are going to be really strong. So for Raiden, prioritize leveling up her skill, change some of the artifacts around, try to get more elemental mastery, and she's going to be a really good support for your Dendro characters. Now let's move on to Venti. Stringless... Oh, this isn't Viridescent, this is Wanderer's Troupe. Oh, actually, take this flower and this goblet and swap them with Raiden, because this one has 40 EM, you got a full one here, it's got crit rate, it's got attack percent, this has a lot of attack percent too, and then you'll get 2 pieces of the EM set, so you'll get an additional 80 EM there, which will push you over 700. And then you just need another 2-piece set from Gilded Dreams or Flower of Paradise Lost, and you have another 2-piece set for even more EM with Raiden. If you could get a good flower that has some EM and some crit, that would be great. If you could get an EM headpiece, that would be great too. Otherwise, a crit rate headpiece with some EM or attack or whatever would honestly be decent too. So even though we were looking at Venti, we ended up going back to Raiden. Oh, so it goes. Alright, back to Venti boy. Yeah, for Venti, you want a 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set. It is the set that looks like it belongs directly to him. It comes from the Maiden/Viridescent domain in Mondstadt, and it is one of the best sets, maybe the best set in the entire game. It increases swirl damage by 60%, and it also has a huge shred for elemental resistances anytime you cause a swirl. Swirls are also transformative reactions, which have the highest multipliers for reaction damage in the entire game, so increasing them by 60% is really nice. But you also shred the resistance of enemies on a particular element that you swirl. So if you're using Venti with Raiden, you swirl the Electro and make Raiden hit even harder. But obviously not just Raiden, because swirls will work on Hydro, Pyro, and Cryo in addition to Electro, so he can make any character of those elements hit even harder. So you really want a 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set. You want to have the 3 variable main stats with Elemental Mastery, so you want the headpiece to have Elemental Mastery, the goblet to have Elemental Mastery as its main stat, and the timepiece to have an Elemental Mastery main stat. As far as substats, you don't really need anything super specific. While crit and crit damage are nice because Venti has pretty good talent multipliers, swirls cannot crit, so you really don't need those since you're building him for swirl damage. And since it's already hard enough to get an Elemental Mastery main stat Viridescent Venerer piece, if you try to farm for one with crit stats, you're going to go absolutely insane. The only substat that you should look out for is Energy Recharge. Venti's burst is the auto win button against small or lightweight enemies, so you want to make sure you have enough energy so that it's up every single time it's off cooldown. Other than that, the Stringless is a really good weapon for him. It gives him EM and increases his skill and burst damage, which is absolutely perfect for Venti. So just go get a 4-piece Viridescent Venerer set for Venti and he'll be absolutely crushing. This is also one of the few times where the set bonus is actually worth having bad or not very good main stats and substats because the bonus for the set is just so good. So if the only Viridescent pieces you get are first really bad, it's okay to use them, just upgrade them slowly over time through the scam box or something like that. Alright, next let's move on to Xingqiu. Noblesse Xingqiu with a bunch of attack. I have not seen this in a very long time. This seems like a very old OG Genshin build where you pretty much slap noblesse on every single character, but there's a lot of better things you can do with Xingqiu nowadays. For instance, you can give him the 4-piece Emblem of the Severed Fate set. It's really good for him, gives him more energy recharge, and makes his burst do more damage the more energy recharge he has. But you can also do something like a 2-piece Noblesse, 2-piece Heart of Depth, 2-piece Noblesse, 2-piece Emblem of the Severed Fate. At the end of the day, you just want to make sure he's got a Hydro Damage Goblet, energy recharge that's well over 200%, and a decent crit rate and crit damage ratio. A really good way to ensure you can do that is give him a Favonius Sword or a Sacrificial Sword. If you don't have that, you can craft the Sapwood Blade, the Sumeru craftable weapon, though you'd much prefer to have a Favonius or a Sacrificial Sword. But before you start farming artifacts for him, I see that your talents here are 6, 6, and 6. You want to get his skill up to at least 8 and his burst up to at least 8, but you can take these to 9 or further. These are his bread and butter. They're the most important parts of his kit, so you want to level up his skill and his burst. And you can completely ignore his normal attacks. Alright, let's move on to Xiangling now. Xiangling with Mrs. Windspear. This is very cool. This is actually a really nice spear for her. As the Spear Archon, it would make sense. Has a sort of moderate mid-level base attack, but it gives you attack percent, and the passive gives you attack percent and EM, but it's only R1. If it was R5, it would be much better. I know this was an event weapon, maybe you weren't able to get all the refinements. It's still a good choice though. However, since it's R1, I would recommend getting the catch for her instead. It's the fishing spear, and I know most people hate fishing, but there's no time limit. It's not like a limited event. You can just fish whenever you want. It gives her energy recharge, which is super nice. Also increases her elemental burst, crit rate, and crit damage, and you can get all the refinements for free. So with the R1 missive, you can use it for now. I would definitely get the catch for her though. And lucky for us, the catch also pairs very well with the Emblem of the Severed Fate set. And since I recommended using EM sets for Raiden instead of the Emblem of the Severed Fate, then that means you can give your good EM pieces to Xiangling. Like, this feather is pretty good, and since you're going to use the feather from Venti on Raiden, you can give this feather to Xiangling, who has this feather, which is not bad, but it's got 18% defense, whereas this one has your crit damage and attack percent and EM. It has flat defense, but this feather is actually better for Xiangling than this one. And again, I also mentioned that you can give her this helmet, which is really, really nice, instead of this defense helmet. That would make her crit damage 140, but her crit rate would still be very low, even with some of the new stats coming from the different artifacts you're giving her. So you may need to farm the emblem domain for a crit rate headpiece, or hopefully get better crit rate stats on your substats from these artifacts. Because having 160 crit damage isn't great if your crit rate is only 20%. But the major thing you want to focus on for Xiangling is energy recharge. That's why you really want an energy recharge sands, and again, the catch has a substat of energy recharge, so between the substat of the catch and an energy recharge sands, it would pop this up by another 90, almost 100%, which is really, really helpful. After that, you can go for your crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and EM and make Xiangling hit really, really hard. Alright, let's move on to Bennett. I feel like Bennett might be a fairly new character because he's got no artifacts on him. You can do a bunch of things with Bennett. You can use a variety of different artifacts on him. Most people like 4-piece Noblesse because it gives you an extra 20% attack, but you can use kind of whatever on him. The main thing is you want him to have at least 180% energy recharge, and then just crit rate, crit damage, pyro damage, goblet is always nice. People run HP goblets on him. There's a big variety of things you can do. Just lots of energy recharge so his burst can be used off cooldown. And then you want to level his burst talent, because the higher level this is, the more attack you transfer, the more you heal, the more general good Bennett things Bennett will do. And to make sure you get the best attack buff possible, you want to make sure you give him a level 90 weapon with a pretty high base attack if you can manage it. You can also use something like a Favonius Sword, which actually has a really low base attack for a 4-star weapon, but the energy regeneration for your entire team and the high energy recharge are both really, really significant buffs for not only Bennett, but your whole team. But if you don't have a Favonius sword, Lion's Roar is good for like a DPS Bennett, but for your Alhaitham, since this has a 565 base attack, it's already level 90, might as well slap it on here. It's going to boost his base attack by over 200, about 240, which is going to make his burst even more significant for your whole team. So you've got a little ways to go on Bennett. Luckily, he's pretty easy to build and you already have a lot of the pieces he'll need. Next, let's move on to Kuki Shinobu, a character I don't have right now, but hopefully we'll get soon. Oh, a C4 Kuki, very nice. So Kuki Shinobu is a very interesting character. I would definitely build her as a hyperbloom support. Think of her as like a second Raiden Shogun with the ability to kind of deal a little bit of damage to herself but also heal your team. Or at least whoever is on the field at the time. Because of that, you want to build Kuki Shinobu in a very similar way. You want to give her an EM weapon, and if you're using the Tukabu Shigure or the Iron Sting on Alhaitham, you can just give the other one to Kuki. Or if you don't have both of those weapons, if you missed the event for some reason, you can just give her a second Iron Sting. You should have 2 sword billets. I think you get 2 throughout the game. If you haven't crafted any before, you should be able to make a second one. And you may have gotten a couple sword billets along the way from boss drops and whatnot. Because I also recommend building Kuki as a hyperbloom character, that means you're going to want a lot of elemental mastery. Her energy recharge and her burst isn't really that important. It's mostly her skill for the healing and having tons of elemental mastery, so when this hits a seed for hyperbloom, then those seeds hit really hard. So I'd recommend giving her a 4-piece Flower of Paradise Lost set with EM headpiece, EM goblet, EM sands. And for substats, if you're building her only for hyperbloom, then you don't need to worry about crit because hyperblooms can't crit. But if you're going to use her in an aggravate team, aggravate can crit, so having attack percent, crit rate, and crit damage is pretty nice. But I would mainly focus on elemental mastery as the main stat and not really stress about the substats. Just run her in a hyperbloom team and she'll perform very well. And if you don't want to farm a Flower of Paradise Lost, I totally get it. Just give her a 2-piece elemental mastery set. In fact, let me see. Since you're going to farm some viridescent pieces for Venti, you can take some of these pieces and give them to Kuki. Like you could give his goblet to her, which is really nice. Or you could give a few of these other things. You're going to give this to probably Raiden instead. But you could give this to her. Your flower doesn't really have a lot, but 54 on the headpiece is pretty decent. 54 on the attack sands is pretty decent, so if you gave her these 2, she'd get 80 there. But really, I think you just want to go for more main stat EM pieces than anything. She's sort of like Venti in that most of the time you don't really need to worry about her substats that much, it's just the main stat that you're looking for. And she also has the added benefit that you don't really need a bunch of energy recharge on her like you do with Venti, because she doesn't really need to use her burst off cooldown like Venti wants to if you're running her in Hyperbloom. While it can be a good extra source of damage, it's not the most integral to a Hyperbloom playstyle. It's actually Kuki's elemental skill, the ring that pulses around your on-field character, that ends up being the most important. Alright, and finally we have Barbara. Let's take a look at her. She has thrilling tales and that's about it. Well, that's totally fine. It depends on where you want to run Barbara and what team you plan to run her in. But if you're going to run her with a Dendro team, she could be your Deepwood healer. She could just have a bunch of random Deepwood artifacts just so you get the effect. Though honestly, I wouldn't suggest building Barbara, especially at this stage. You've got a lot of really good characters. I don't think you need Barbara at all. Bennett and Kuki should provide plenty of healing, and they also have really good other support capabilities. Barbara's support capabilities are basically just going to come from whatever artifacts that she has. And Bennett and Kuki can run the same artifacts that she can, so she doesn't have any other advantage there. Now, you mentioned before that your main team consisted of Alhaitham and Raiden. I think what you should do is do Alhaitham, Raiden, Kuki Shinobu, and maybe Venti. I think that's a good team for you. While it doesn't have any shielding or interruption resistance, you've got both Raiden and Kuki for the Electro, Kuki for the healing. Venti can swirl the Electro so it deals more damage, and then you can just run sort of a spread aggravate team where Alhaitham does so much Dendro on field that anything done by both Raiden or by Kuki Shinobu is going to get amplified by the Quicken reaction, but also Venti's swirl. And it can typically be difficult to run an Animo element in a team like this, but because you've got a lot of Electro between Kuki and Raiden, I think you'll be fine. Then for your second team, I would probably just run the national team. Do Bennett, Xiangling, Xingqiu. These three are such a very strong core together that you can put almost any other character in the 4 slot because they'll do pretty much all the work themselves. As far as what to farm, since you're going to probably have to redo Alhaitham, and since you're going to have to rebuild Raiden a little bit, I think what you'll want to do is be in the Deepwood domain. This way you can farm for Deepwood and Gilded Dreams, either Deepwood or Gilded Dreams for him, and then Deepwood, Gilded Dreams, 2-piece EM for her. In fact, if you're going to put Kuki in this team and follow my advice, I would put Deepwood on Kuki, so then she can buff your Alhaitham and give him Gilded Dreams. Once you're fairly satisfied with this team, it doesn't need to be the best team ever, then I would probably take that team or some combination of this national team and then start farming Emblem. All these characters really appreciate Emblem, either 2-piece or 4-piece, and Emblem's just a really high efficiency domain too, so then go to Emblem after doing your Deepwood domain. But of course, make sure you level your weapons, talents, and all that stuff before you go into artifacts because you don't want RNG to punch you in the face over and over when you know you can progress your account through other ways. Also, hold off on Barber for now. She's not really that integral to your overall account. These other characters you have are way better, so make sure to focus and build them first. Overall, does need a bit of farming, but pretty solid. You've got everything you need, you just have to invest into the characters.